Welcome to the Cyclical Doula Podcast. I'm Emma, a certified Sympto Pro instructor, a fertility awareness educator, and your guide to fertility coaching and reproductive health education from menarche to menopause and all the different types of motherhood in between. If you're seeking a natural, science-backed approach to managing your fertility, understanding your cycle, or simply connecting with your body in a new way, you're in the right place. Each episode is designed to empower you with the tools, knowledge, and confidence you need to thrive in your unique journey. Quick disclaimer, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice or individualized charting support. For specific guidance, please consult with your healthcare provider or fertility awareness instructor. Now, let's dive into today's topic.
Welcome to the space where cycles breathe, where the real raw life of a mama leads. From motherhood's highs to charting the low, your body's story is the star of the show. Matriarch heart.
Welcome back to the Cyclical Doula Podcast. Today we are going to be talking about menstruation and menstrual bleeds and what to look for that sounds is normal, and what to look for as like red flags, things that could be off, and what you can do about it. And the reason that this is sparking my interest in talking about this today, other than the fact that I feel it's not something that's talked about enough, is that I personally have had heavy menstrual bleeds for the majority of my reproductive lifespan. And for me, that's always kind of looked just like knowing that it's been heavy, but not understanding that it's like out of the ordinary about how heavy it is. And recently, I was just doing annual blood work with my healthcare professionals, and they determined that my ferritin levels are really low, which is what your iron storage is at. So it seems like my iron is fine, but the storage is really low. And there's a lot of things that go into that, and I'm personally diving into all those different things with them. But one of the things that related to menstruation with that is that sometimes when you have less iron in your body will actually bleed more and then cause you to decrease that iron even more. So this is just one of the many red flags that we can see when and things to look into when we have that. So we're talking about what's normal, what's not, how much blood is too much blood, why we feel like for some people it's gonna be like a horror movie and some people are barely bleeding at all. Let's start with the basics. Normal menstrual bleed, according to research and clinical guidelines, has typically three characteristics. The first is cycle length, and so a full menstrual cycle lasts typically around 26 to 32 days, sometimes a little bit more or less than that. And so that's from day one of a bleed to the next day one of the bleed. We're also looking at bleeding duration, and menstrual bleeds usually last 3 to 7 days on average. Ideally, the total blood loss, which is the average blood loss, is around 30 to 40 milliliters per period. So that's over those days that you're bleeding, which is about 2 to 3 tablespoons of blood. It can be as low as 10 milliliters and up to 80 milliliters and still be considered within that normal range. But if it's outside of that, it's concerning. The flow pattern, so we're then also looking at that. So we're looking for that bleeding to start heavier, peak, and then taper back off. Ideally, you want the color to be a bright to dark red. It may start light pink or kind of rusty brown, and the same way. Usually that's older blood that's cleared from the uterus, but sometimes those things can also be a red flag as well. So these are just general ranges, not rigid rules. Everybody's going to be unique, but if your experience consistently falls far outside of these, that's a sign that your body's asking for some attention. So I always recommend that everybody's tracking in some sort of way. And when you're tracking your bleeding, you can use consistent categories for light, medium, and heavy days. And over a few cycles, you'll see your personal patterns more clearly. All right, let's talk about when bleeding is outside of those expected ranges. Because this is where a lot of people either brush it off as this is just how my period is, or get brushed off by healthcare professionals. So here are some red flags to pay attention to. Bleeding longer than 8 days consistently is extremely abnormal, and you should get some diagnostic work done. Heavy menstrual bleeding is defined medically as losing more than 80 milliliters per cycle. So for a lot of people, when we're talking about this, we say like that's soaking through a pad or a tampon every 1 to 2 hours, passing clots larger than a quarter, or needing double protection, like you're using a tampon and a pad, or a menstrual disc and period underwear, things like that. And then also that you might need to change your menstrual products overnight because of flooding. I feel like as a general group of society of women, we sometimes talk about heavy menstrual bleeding and we just kind of normalize it. 80 milliliters, if you like go pour that of water into a cup, think about how that is. And then if you are able to track it, I have a couple of resources for you to be able to track to see how much that actually is. For some people, that they're losing so much more than 80 milliliters in those bleeding days. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that what you might think is heavy might be like extreme. So let's make sure that we're paying attention to that. The other thing that we see sometimes is bleeding in between menstruation. So a cycle is focused on ovulation. That's the thing that's important to remember. And only one ovulation can happen in a cycle. And sometimes there's other bleeding that happens within that cycle. Things like ovulation spotting. Sometimes you have a little bit of spotting right around the day that would be ovulation. Usually that's just because of the like drastic swing in hormone patterns that's happening. If you're seeing other bleeding that's happening within a cycle, or you're not catching ovulation but you're bleeding, you're having like breakthrough bleeding, it might be something to look into. If you're bleeding more than 8 days in a row, or spotting the majority of your cycle, things like that, those are things to get medical attention for, and look deeper into. But that's just some of that. All right, and then if you have all of a sudden like a huge change in bleeding patterns, so if you're typically have a certain bleeding pattern and then you have a much heavier or a much lighter one without a clear reason, so like a clear reason would be like postpartum recovery or stopping hormonal birth control or being into that perimenopause phase of life. But otherwise, like, that's a big red flag. I just recently had someone be like, man, I had like the lightest period I've ever had recently. And I was like, ooh, like, let's think about what that actually means, and can dive deeper into that. All of these things can indicate all sorts of different stuff, and this is not an extensive list, and this doesn't mean that you have any of these things, but just so you kind of have an idea. So these heavy or irregular bleedings can signal things like hormonal imbalances, like estrogen dominance or low progesterone, can signal things like thyroid disorders, PCOS, fibroids, endometrial polyps, or even coagulation disorders like von Willebrand's disease, which is actually underdiagnosed in people with lifelong heavy periods. And then also, some people, the other thing I don't think I said was endometriosis. Those also can be in there. So if you've ever been told that this is just how your periods are, but you've been changing a tampon every hour, or you can't leave the house when you're bleeding because it's just so much and uncomfortable and all of that, that's not normal, and you deserve better care. So I want you to take a moment, just sit with that. You deserve better care, and I would love to help you find the care that you need to make sure that you're getting that. A lot of people are surprised to learn that the color and texture of menstrual blood can give different clues too. So when, again, that healthy, fresh bleeding is going to be like a bright red. That darker red or a little bit of brown to start or end usually just means that it's older blood. It's common at the bookends of a period, but if we see it for extended periods of time, more than just like a couple little bits, if it's multiple days of brown bleeding, that can be another indicator that we should look out for. If you have like watery or pale bleeding, so it's like a really light pink, that could indicate a low flow or low estrogen. If it's very thick or clotty, like you're having significant heavy bleeding or lots of clots, it can be something like fibroids. And then again, consistency matters too. So a period that starts with days of spotting before a real flow begins can signal a short luteal phase or low progesterone, and bleeding that tapers off too slowly can sometimes indicate hormonal balances as well. So charting these in detail, things like colors, if you're seeing any clots, the flow level, all of those things help identify patterns over time and can be really valuable to bring to a healthcare professional to say, hey, like, here's my actual information, and this is what we're going to do. Like, this is what's coming up for me. This is how I'm feeling. And this is the physical data that you can see that's happening over a couple of cycles. All right, so the thing, when we're thinking about all of this, it's important to remember that menstrual bleeding doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Several factors influence how much and how long you bleed. Things like hormones. So estrogen builds that uterine lining and progesterone stabilizes it. So if your progesterone is low, your luteal phase can be short and you might see some premenstrual spotting. People whose thyroid function is not working really well, both hypo and hyperthyroidism, can have interesting bleeding patterns and should be something to watch out for. It's also helpful to remember that depending upon your age and reproductive stage, your bleeding pattern might be a little bit different. So teens, adolescents often have irregular cycles as ovulation becomes established, and it is usually 6 to 8 years before from like your first menstruation to when you're considered out of that adolescent phase of reproductive like menstruation and all of those things. So 6 to 8 years. Think about that for a second. If you got your period when, let's say, you were 12, that's going to be until you're 18 or 20 that your cycle's regulating. So I think that's really important for us to, as parents and as other people who are just walking with the next generation, like, let's remember that it's normal for our body to take this time to regulate, and therefore, although it's frustrating that bleeds can come unpredictably, charting can help get that knowledge base, and also just like being aware that it's okay that our cycles are taking that time to regulate is really important. All right, that was a little sideline, but there you go. So perimenopause cycles can also be more unpredictable, and that's something to consider as well if you're in that season of life. When you're taking different medications, that can also affect bleeding, and so things like anticoagulants, NSAIDs, or other hormonal medications can change your bleeding patterns as well. So when we're in significant reproductive life changes like postpartum, any loss, any pregnancy loss, or any post-hormone contraceptives, bleeding patterns shift significantly after those transitions. All of those are usually pretty similar in the way that they happen. They usually, especially postpartum, you're going to see like a big bleed with that postpartum right afterwards, and then kind of regulating with that. And bleeding can kind of happen in different phases than a typical cycle would. So understanding these factors help you read your cycle as a health sign, not just that monthly nuisance. So if your bleeding is falling outside this normal range, especially if it's affecting your quality of life, or like absolutely if it's affecting your quality of life, then you should look into some medical evaluation. And I know that's hard. It's hard in our lives when we've gone before to some type of healthcare professional and they've just brushed us off. But I would highly recommend you find somebody that you feel comfortable having this conversation with and saying, like, I don't feel great. It is not doing what I want it to do. And therefore, help me figure this out. And so things to ask for could include to do a general like CBC to check for anemia or other iron levels. Doing thyroid labs, looking at TSH, free T4, and sometimes even antibodies. I'd also recommend, if those things come up as normal, to also do progesterone testing about 7 days post-ovulation. And if you're charting, that'll be easy to find once you find that like peak, to do 7 days post-peak. Also looking into checking a pelvic ultrasound to see if you have fibroids or polyps, and then looking at coagulation studies if heavy bleeding has been present since menarche. And of course, if you're working with a fertility awareness educator like me, we can often spot these hormonal patterns through charting and help you advocate for getting targeted testing. Your menstrual bleed is not just a messy inconvenience. It's like a monthly report card from your body. And when you know what's normal and what's not, you can catch those issues earlier and get the support you need and trust your body's signal more deeply. If this episode has sparked some aha moments for you, I'd love for you to share it with a friend or leave a review so more women can find this kind of cycle education. And if you're ready to get your own personal support decoding your cycle, you can always schedule a free inquiry call with me at emma.com/free, EMMA.com/free, or explore my programs like Matriarch, where we dive deep into this work together. I'd love to connect with you and can't wait to see you soon. Thanks so much for tuning into the Cyclical Doula Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean so much if you shared it with a friend or posted it on Instagram and tagged me at Cyclical Doula. If you've got a question you'd love to hear answered on the show, head over to emma.com/podcast to submit it. And don't forget, leaving a quick review really helps this podcast reach more people. Plus, if you upload a screenshot of your review on my website, I'll send you a special surprise as a thank you. You'll find all the details in the show notes. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.
Welcome to the space where cycles breathe, where the real raw life of a mama leads. From motherhood's highs to charting the low, your body's story is the star of the show. Matriarch hearts, cycles that speak, charting the truth in every peak. This is the cyclical doula sound, where body wisdom is always found.